Hi, folks. This is the Psychology of Human Sexuality, and we're going to talk now about sexual behavior. We'll talk about what is the range of typical sexual behaviors that folks engage in. The first thing I want to tell you is that the Kinsey Institute at the University of Indiana, Bloomington, has a really great website. And if you locate that, you will see charts about behaviors that people engage in across the lifespan, both male and female, and by age and by behavior. And it's very enlightening. It'll give you some ideas. And what a lot of people do is they have questions about what they like to do or what they are doing. Is they wonder, is this normal? Is this typical? And this kind of information can help you considerably see that the span of what people do is quite wide. Yes. Okay. And it varies across a lifespan, but it's very interesting to look at this. Now, if we look at the difference between male and female sex drive, we want to first notice a few things, and that is, first, women think about sex less often than men more often than women on average. Women have fewer sexual fantasies than men, involving fewer partners and less variety of activities. They are less specific in their fantasies and desires on average than males are. Women initiate sex less often and refuse sex more often than men. Women desire fewer partners and seek out fewer extramarital partners than men. If you're talking about patterns and cycles in desire, then we note a few things. One is couples are more likely to have sexual activity in the evening and on Sundays. There are monthly variations in sexual desire among females, which can be significant and may or may not be tied to periods of high fertility. There's no real data that suggests that high fertility times is when females would be more likely to be sexual. Okay? And these differences are due in part to testosterone. Males have 10 to 15 times the amount of serum testosterone than females, but that's not the whole story. Females are more likely to feel sexual when they are not overstressed and over anxious about the many things that they feel responsible for and maybe are responsible for, likely are. When they feel safe, when they feel respected, and don't feel pressured. On average, that's a true statement. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about people who don't necessarily want sexual activity. We call that the celibacy, and there's two forms. There's a complete celibacy and a partial celibacy. So complete celibacy is when a sexually mature person does not engage in any sexual behaviors either with themselves or with other people. Partial is they may self-pleasure but don't have sexual behaviors with other people, adults. Okay? Lots of reasons for this, yes. Well, they may have moral or religious beliefs associated with that. They may be waiting for the right person. They may be focusing on themselves and self-growth and deepening friendships, and they may have health considerations, pregnancy, STIs, and so on. They may be in the middle of or in some stage of recovery from substance abuse or sex addiction. They may be someone who is very anxious about sexuality and has never really moved beyond that anxiety. Okay. What we do know is that the more education a person has, the more likely they are to actually remain a virgin, a person who has not yet had sex, for longer periods of time. Okay? That's very interesting. So if you just looked at the data on comprehensive sex education, you would find out that comprehensive sex education has the same outcome. It's a form of education specifically designed to cover all the different possibilities about sex, and people who get that wait till they're older than those who don't receive any sex education or receive only abstinence-only sex education. Now, in terms of masturbation or self-pleasuring, which I prefer as a descriptor, we need to note that it's been historically condemned. Okay, it has run the gamut from believing that it causes blindness and emaciation and insanity and hopelessness and depression and all sorts of things, to it being a behavior that is a signal to immature sexual development, that's Freud, to being a sinful act, which is intrinsically and seriously disordered as a behavior. And so, you name it, we've seen that. Now, there is even a group that has recently, in the last 5 or so years, gained traction that has to do with not self-pleasuring. And I'll leave you to find those websites if that's what you're interested in. But it's kind of an oath you take. And now, I will say that in certain self-help groups associated with sex addiction, sex compulsive behavior recovery, then some of them, but not all of them, they want you to not self-pleasure. Okay, others of those groups don't make any such requests. I'll just say requests. But why do people self-pleasure? Well, it's obvious, isn't it? Sexual tension is relieved. It's a way to explore what you like. It can improve the quality of sexual experience with a partner if you know how to be pleasured unto yourself. It can be a shared experience, and it assists in physical relaxation and can induce sleep. There are lots of reasons for it. Okay. I will say this, that males don't really require much in the way of self-exploration to discover what feels good. There's one thing that feels good, and they figure it out quickly because the genitals of males are pendulous and exterior to the body, and so they touch their genitals every time they urinate, and this is it's pretty evident what brings pleasure to them. And females may have to explore a bit to figure out what feels best. Okay. I'll tell you that something you may know, and that is that as electricity became a part of larger cities, it was never a part of rural America to start with, not for a long time. But as it gained its way into large cities and wealthier areas, I think the first household that had electricity was in the 1880s. I think it was a Vanderbilt home. But the larger cities could afford to run lines and have generation facilities. That really wasn't until the 1880s, 90s. But here's something interesting and kind of humorous. The invention of the vibrator for self-pleasuring preceded the development of the electric toaster. But people have been masturbating for many millennia, I suspect. And each person does it a little bit differently. Now, I want to relate to you something that was spoken of in the previous video, and that is each person has a threshold of stimulation and type of stimulation that's required to bring about an orgasm. Females have a wider variety, a wider range of these thresholds, and those thresholds can vary depending on things like stress and fatigue and things that would raise the threshold, beyond which is required more stimulation, and reducing things like less stress, less anxiety, less busyness, so just to give an example. And so if you have visited any website that sells vibrators, or go to Amazon.com and look at sexual health and wellness, more than 100,000, 200,000, 300,000 different kinds of vibrators. Most of that is just silliness. It can be fun, oh ha ha, but it's kind of silliness. What we really need to be thinking about is, if someone is orgasmic with a particular behavior that's self-pleasuring, great. Then do you need anything else, or do you need, or not? Probably not. You want to experiment? Great. But the vibrators that they advertise for sale are generally not much different than others. Now, a couple rules of thumb. Battery operated are less powerful than plug-ins. And among plug-ins, there are a number that are very, very powerful and others that are not. Okay, so it has to be sort of expected there'll be some variance. But not everyone uses a vibrator with females. Males don't use a vibrator typically. You can buy a couple little different things that exist, but there aren't many things for males. Back to this issue of how it's a bit different for males. Males have a relatively low threshold for stimulation on average. Well, more men than women masturbate. And usually it's just holding and stroking their penises. And as I said, there are very few masturbation devices. Now, I want to touch on compulsive masturbation, and among either males or females. It's a little more common among males, but compulsive masturbation means that you feel the need to masturbate even in spite of not feeling sexual desire. Okay, now that's my definition. That seems to work well when trying to define the difference between compulsive versus non-compulsive. I'm going to leave the word addiction out of it. That word is thrown about a bit too much, I think, but I'm aware of what I'm saying here intentionally. So compulsive masturbation may be a sign of things that come along with that: social ineptitude, isolation, drug use, other dysfunctions, brain injury, all sorts of things can induce this. And it likely requires some level of treatment. I treated one guy for this who had a lot of sores in his genitals from the compulsive masturbation. So this is not a simple thing, is it? Okay. If we talk about the next level of sexual connection, which is foreplay, what we're talking about is anything more likely touch than things that are non-touch oriented, that are designed to stimulate a partner sexually, to have sex or to then engage in penetrative sexual activity. So these can be things like doing things for your partner days before. They may tell you, as I said earlier, that this is a form of foreplay for them. It may be back rubs or massages. It may be focusing on areas that are not erogenous zones and touching those. But it generally implies, doesn't it, for most people, foreplay, that it involves touching erogenous zones and then offering stimulation, either using hands or mouth, to stimulate those areas before intercourse. Well, lots of people don't have intercourse. They only have the touching and the caressing and the oral stimulation, for example. Or they self-pleasure next to each other. It's not uncommon. They have reliable orgasms in that way. So you'll see many middle-aged couples or older engaging in that. They, when you self-pleasure, you know exactly what is required to give you an orgasm. Okay. Typically, women want more foreplay than men. And women, more likely than men, want their whole bodies involved. Although I think that while men are more genitally focused, they understand that other parts of their body are great to have touched as they get into middle age or older, hopefully. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about kissing. Kissing, if you're going to give it a definition, could be the mouth-to-mouth orientation of two individuals, or the pressing of one's lips on some other part of another person's body. Does that cover it all? Is it genetic? Well, not all societies kiss. Some societies consider it disgusting. Most do. Some inhibit the desire. as a social convention? Is it an early association with breastfeeding and nourishment and pleasure? Freud thinks so. Freud thought it was breast deprivation, primarily becoming kissing behaviors and desire to kiss. Is it a remnant of sniffing? Is it a remnant of premastication, which means chewing food so that a baby could eat it? And early humans likely had to premasticate most foods because much of what they ate was tough, maybe high in cellulose, and so they would have to eat things, at least they would have to chew them up really, really well to make them tender enough for the baby to get the nutrients out of it and be able to digest it. But kissing for many people is more intimate than oral sexual intercourse. In fact, many couples, and I'll dare say most, give up making out, deep kissing, that is, after they've established a relationship of some length. 6 months, 9 months, I don't know. But it seems to be something that goes away. It may return once in a while, but it's not as something that they do on a regular basis as they did early on in their relationship. But kissing can be so intimate that you can develop phobias to this. I've treated this twice. One phobia was about the emotional closeness, but he also said that he didn't like the way it smelled, and he was ultimately sort of offended by it. But it also had to do for him the closeness of it, and he had a fear of intimacy. Another person, it was strictly the fear of closeness, and it was so intimate. Do you not, when you see couples making out in a very deep kissing way, feel like you're intruding on them if they're doing that in public and you're looking at them? That's a signal to you that it's extremely private and intimate. Yes. The closeness and intimacy of deep kissing is such that we almost always close our eyes. In fact, if you kept your eyes open, it would be a little bit bizarre. Yeah. Okay. 2/3 of all people tilt their heads to the right during kissing. The phrase French kiss was a slur made up by Americans who thought the French were overly concerned with sexual activity. Not that kissing is sexual, but it's thought to have led in the way that the French were stereotypically seen to be kissing. The first mention of a kiss in literature is about 1500 BC. Yeah, just a few things. Oh, Kama Sutra lists more than 30 types of kisses. Bonobo monkeys kiss with their tongues and mouths. The only other animal besides humans that do that. And we share a closer genetic link, closer in terms of percentage of identical DNA than with any other animal. First kiss on screen between two men, 1922, before the Hays Code hit in 1930. The Hays Code demanded a number of things, which you couldn't kiss if you were laying down. If one had to be sitting or standing. Couldn't show one bed in a bedroom. Had to be twin beds. If they were kissing, one had to have one foot on the floor. They couldn't show the inside of bathrooms. All sorts of bizarre things. Sexiest kiss by vote in a movie. Bet you can't pick out what it is. But I'll tell you. It's the Ingrid Bergman, Cary Grant kiss in the original movie Notorious, 1946. You can find it on YouTube. In some South Pacific cultures, not many, a few, short eyelashes are considered a sign of sexual prowess and status because they result from the custom of biting off the partner's eyelashes during sexual activity. And less fun than that, even, is when two people kiss, they exchange up to 1 billion bacteria and certainly viruses. How about this one? The X at the end of a letter or card is a signal that you're saying this is the shape of the way lips contact when they're kissing. The X. If we talk about oral genital stimulation, then what we want to talk about is that the more educated a person is, the more likely they are, both among males and females, for both giving and receiving oral sex. Interesting? Yeah, very interesting. So statistically, giving and receiving oral sex is pretty typical. And it's become more typical than it was in, say, the 1950s, when oral sex was far less often a part of sexual behavior before marriage. It was considered even more intimate than intercourse. And some people still feel that way, of course. Other people consider it to be very casual. In fact, younger teens will often engage in oral sexual activity and think nothing of it as not even that as a sexual activity to begin with. But remember that the mouth is a mucosal membrane, and the mucosal membranes are present in genitals, so you're exchanging bacteria, including harmful things, and viruses, harmful things, if they're present, and you have, let's say, you've got your teeth cleaned, or you've got an ulceration, or some such thing. So the possibility of STI, sexually transmitted infection, is present. One has to be careful. Let's talk about being very careful when one is engaging in what's called analingus, which is applying lips and tongue to the anal region or the perineum. One has to be very clean. We prefer that an oral dam is used. That's a very thin sheet of latex, or even saran wrap could be used. We actually prefer that. So that way you don't inadvertently acquire an infection of Escherichia coli or some other bacteria or virus. That's what we hope. Okay, but we still want people to be very clean nonetheless, and we want people to maybe even use what's called a fleet enema prior to that behavior. Okay, so let's talk about intercourse, what is sometimes called coitus. The Big Bang Theory made jokes about calling intercourse coitus. It's less commonly heard than intercourse. But what we're generally talking about in vaginal intercourse is, generally speaking, penis and vagina. I will tell you that my own feeling is that intercourse is the closest, I think, that two humans can get physically. I think pretty much biologically that's a true statement. And there's really only 4 basic positions to be in, which then result in variations. And the first thing I'll say about this is that women should, in a male-female relationship, a woman should be the one to choose when intromission occurs, when the penis goes into the vagina. Okay. So I want to talk also about the emotional aspects of intercourse too. So some considerations that we have to think about with intercourse is tempo, angle, style of movement, degree of penetration. Does the position allow for manual stimulation of other parts of the body, caressing, talking, looking at each other? Some allow partners to enjoy being more aggressive or more passive. Some allow for this face-to-face and communication and talking and that kind of emotional intimacy. Some positions are scary to people. There are people who have had abuse events or assaults, and intercourse in general could be very anxiety-provoking, or a position reminiscent of the abuse or assault could be very troubling to them. One would immediately know that's a true statement. So some positions are scary to people. When a partner is unusually large and then is in a position where they're in a superior or above position, that can be really claustrophobic and difficult, and even physically difficult. So we have to consider physical ability. So by the time middle age arises, you may have hip or knee problems, or lacking some muscular strength. Some positions are more relaxing, others less so. The original humans, says some people, position is the missionary position, and that comes from the idea that the Catholic Church, which has really sort of promoted this over the centuries, is that it's the only position that's appropriate for humans, because the rear entry position is an animalistic one, that all other animals engage in that. So missionary position is what it got called. I call it the male above. It's a traditional, it's relaxing for most people, although the male has to be propping up the upper part of the body, and the male is in charge of most of what happens. But it's good for females that have back problems, and in addition, it's good for emotional connection because kissing and facial gazing is possible. I want to tell you right away that most couples, even great couples, don't look at each other and don't talk during sexual activity. Does that surprise you? I should say many. I don't have good data on this, so I should say many to most, something like that. I don't know. Yeah. And then, of course, the strategic use of pillows is important. You'd be surprised what a thinner pillow in the right spot or a somewhat thicker pillow in the right spot can accomplish in terms of alleviating stress on a joint or a back or something. It's not advised, this position, for people who are trying to recover from premature ejaculation or what I call early ejaculation. It's not advisable after about the 5th month of pregnancy. And really, it's difficult for the male to caress the female's body. The female can caress his body relatively easily, but not so in the other direction. Okay. So in male behind, this gives a lot of freedom for both male and female. It has somewhat of a primal feel for humans, but it allows a lot of freedom of movement for both males and females. Less effort is required from the male, and he doesn't have to hold his body weight up. And it's good for females with large tummies. It's very good for that. Okay. In the woman above position, the woman can alter the angle of penetration to vary the sensation and the depth of penetration. The male needs to relax because if she is the one in control of thrusting, then he has to know that she's not going to pull off of his penis and then ride back down on it suddenly, because that can cause a break in one of the corpus cavernosa. It's easy in this position for the male to touch the female and the female to touch the male, so it's a very nice position. But it does create a visibility to the female. So if she's got some feelings in self-esteem about her body, she doesn't like the way her body looks, she's very visible in this position. So she may choose, for example, to wear a t-shirt, or perhaps reverse her position, which would be good if her partner has a large tummy, or she has a large tummy, or she has issues surrounding her the way she looks. Okay, she's not proud of how she looks, which would be a shame. It's also a position when she's reversed to use a vibrator or her fingers. Okay. Then lateral entry, or side by side, I like to call it. Some people call it spooning. That she can regulate the depth of penetration by pulling her knees up or putting her legs out straighter. And it's very easy for either person to stimulate the female with their fingers or a vibrator. And males can much more easily delay ejaculation. This position and the female above are the two positions that, when it's time in the protocol for addressing premature ejaculation, what I call early ejaculation, then those are the two positions you would, when you return to intercourse, would use. Okay. The side-by-side is also the least physically taxing. It's a very cuddly kind of position. Although you can go 90 degrees, lying right next to each other is often a very cuddly position to be in. It's good for overweight partners, and if they are overweight, they can have a sort of a 90-degree connection there. You know? It's good during pregnancy because there's no pressure on the female's abdomen, as is female above. Okay. So I do have a section, if you'll read your PowerPoint, on tantric sex, and I offer you an Americanized translation of designing an empty space and other kinds of things related to that. I do want to talk about homosexual male sex and lesbian sex now. So homosexual male sex is full of stereotypes and assumptions. And one of those is that young male homosexuals are more likely to have energetic, genitally focused sex. Well, they do. But that's because they're young males, not because they're homosexual. Young heterosexual males like energetic, genitally focused sex too. See? Ascribing that to just gay men is a mistake. The idea that there's a gay lifestyle for male homosexuals. No, there is no. Well, if you had to describe a lifestyle for gay men, it would be they could get up and they prepare for work, they go to work, they go, on the way home they pick up some groceries, they come home, they fix dinner, watch some TV, and then go to bed. There's if you think that the gay lifestyle is running off to clubs every night and acting in a promiscuous fashion, what you're talking about is young men. They're not young gay men, per se. Okay. Another myth is that all male homosexuals have anal intercourse. No, they don't. Many do not. Something to keep in mind is that all intercourse positions are available to homosexual males as they are for females and males. Yeah. Virtually all gay men engage in manual and or mutual masturbation, as well as fellatio. Pretty universal. Kind of like men. Let's talk about lesbian sex, okay? Typically, they engage in more affectionate foreplay, especially kissing, because they're women, not because they're gay. Most engage in cunnilingus. Some may engage in one or another forms of penetrative sex, but every person in the couple is different. They may engage in what's called tribadism, which is scissoring, when they rub their genitals together. So there's really not much else to talk about in terms of that. Let's talk about fantasy. Fantasy, as I explain it, is just a mentally invented erotic circumstance that raises or enlivens sexual arousal and response. So it's mentally invented erotic scene. Okay. Sexual fantasies are probably the sole property of animals, of humans, and not present in other animals. There have been a lot of surveys on what percentage of adults engage in sexual fantasy, from 50% to 98%. I don't know what the real number is, but it's got to be over 90%. It's a source of arousal and pleasure. It's a source of overcoming sexual anxiety. In fact, for older people, particularly men, and sometimes women, but more likely men than women, who have trouble attaining and maintaining erections enough for sexual activity, they may very well benefit